Hey everyone, I'm Benjamin, and welcome to my book club. I just finished reading The Forge of God by Greg Bear, and the ending was fantastic, and I want to talk about it. So, spoiler warnings right off the bat. This entire video is a spoiler. Let's get right into it. Right off the bat, I feel vindicated. My care for Europa throughout the entire book pays off, with Europa really being the hero in the final hours. But we'll get more into that later. Let's just jump right into the recap. So I'll go through the events at the end of the book in our normal fashion, but first off, I just kind of want to go through one chapter that I thought was really, really well done. It's, I think, my favourite chapter of the book, and it's chapter 66. In this chapter, we start off Arthur and his family, his wife Francine, his son Marty, at his sister-in-law's and husband-in-law's house. So Francine's sister and her husband, as just sort of a space near San Francisco where they can stay with family while they wait to see what's happening next. And it's a really great chapter where it explores the people that are being left behind in a way that I think the Edward chapters were supposed to, but didn't really capture for me. We have Arthur staying with family, knowing that the world's ending. They know that the world's ending, but Arthur knows that there might be a way to survive. And the way the chapter deals with that sort of guilt and grief is more poignant than it has been elsewhere in the book. And if the book was more of this feeling, I think I'd give it a much higher rating. I'm not going to give it a low rating, but I'd give it a much higher rating. I really love grief and sadness in these sort of books, and this chapter captures it more than elsewhere, as Arthur is contacted to leave and head towards what he thinks might be, an arc to survival, and has to lie to the family because they can't come, he can't tell them, but they know that something's happening, so he has to, tell his sister-in-law, her husband, and their young daughter, that they're just leaving and, they're probably not coming back. And everyone knows what's going on, but no one's saying it out loud. And it's just a really, really great moment. Alright, a recap of the ending. We were right, the Earth was not getting saved. And most of the chapters at the end of this book were going through its death throes, its dying moments. And each and every one of them was fantastic. The end of this book was so good. So the Earth is dying. We see Arthur and his family make it to one of these arcs and go underneath the sea into one of these arcs and experience what's going on inside there. They meet a robot, kind of like a dwarf-sized robot, who's kind of bronze. They end up getting named mums. There are many of them, and this mum informs them that they are one of 31 arcs, 25 of which are carrying people, and that they are going to leave Earth momentarily, meet up with the other arcs, form into kind of one big ship, and then from there, who knows? They inform them that they must pick witnesses, at least 4 witnesses, 2 of which must be children, to watch the destruction of the planet, because this is the law. And we will keep referencing back to the law as we go on. Specifically in the epilogue, we'll learn a little bit more about it. But it's sort of ominous the way they're spoken to. It tells them that, it's going to be a hard transition learning to live because, they must be disciplined. They must learn to be disciplined. And it's, very ominous about, what's going to happen here? And, we've been saved from destruction of the planet, but what does that actually mean? And the ship itself is fantastic inside. I really wanted to find out what was inside. And inside we find this sort of, moving layout, moving sections and rooms can move around the ship as are needed. There's clearly some very advanced anti-gravity. They're walking through corridors which, move at 90-degree angles, and suddenly they're walking on what was once the wall. The moments within the arc deal with these people that have been rescued and their elation at surviving, their worry about what's going to come forward, and their survivor's guilt. The guilt that they're here and other people aren't, and why are they here? What do they bring? What makes them special? And on this arc, we also have Reuben as well. So Arthur and Reuben meet for the first time. They don't talk about their stories, but, they stand next to each other, and that's really good. But let's go over the destruction of the planet. So we see the destruction of Earth from really kind of 4 main viewpoints. The first of which is the people that discovered the idea and the existence of these bullets that are circling on inside, the sort of geologists and climate scientists that were aboard the boat. Again, aboard a boat, monitoring the thermonuclear weapons that are below the ocean. They were monitoring the oxygen release that has now stopped, and they see green glows and light begin to pop underneath the ocean as the nuclear bombs start to detonate. and they see the water spouts that get created and the waves of radiation that come through. And it's these water spouts that end up crushing and twisting their ship, and they're cast off into sea, into this boiling, bubbling mess, which isn't even really water anymore. You can't swim in it. It's a mix between water and air, and that's the last we see of them as they pass away. Next, we're back with President 𝕠𝕠𝕠𝕠𝕠 in the White House, and this is a scene full of barely controlled rage from the people around 𝕠𝕠𝕠𝕠, as he still doesn't seem to realize what a mess he's made of this whole situation. The underlying current and thought in the room seems to be, if President 𝕠𝕠𝕠𝕠 had taken this more seriously, had not given up, perhaps this wouldn't be happening. I would say he'd go down in history, but there is no history left. But clearly his legacy is that of a failure at this point. And we have him and some members of his cabinet that had resigned and are now back just for this last moment. We have his wife back with him in the last moment because, as she says, no wife has ever deserted a president of the United States who's under fire. And they're watching satellite imagery of these explosions when the ground starts to rumble, and they realise that the end is minutes away at most. And they kind of say their last words, and then they're hiding under desks as the White House starts to shake, and they're crawling around on the floor, and their superiority and their level of demeanor and high mightiness is felled by just the pure power at hand. They're crawling around on the floor as bits of plaster are falling, until finally the White House can't take any more, and the president and his cabinet are crushed by the White House itself in a really poignant moment. And then we get the payoff for Edward in Yosemite. A storyline that I'd not really been very interested in, that I thought was kind of just bloating a bit, does pay off here. The destruction of Yosemite National Park is epic. You have the big cliffs slowly breaking away in chunks. You have Half Dome itself collapsing into a fissure that's open in the ground, and the surrounding mountains falling and collapsing in. You have the ground sort of as a bubbling mud mess of molten rock and trees. You have trees falling and sliding down mountainsides on giant slabs of granite. Huge cacophonies of noises. And you have the people around Edward trying to, come to terms with the fact they're dying. You've got people singing folk songs and hymns and people praying as Edward and the woman he met, in the last few days of his life are hugging and holding each other, comforting each other in these last moments. And you have a great moment as him and Manelli, his friend, are split apart by a fissure as one part of the cliff that they're on starts shooting upwards and one part starts dropping down. And as Edward drops down, seeing the rocks either side of him, and that's the final moment we have from Edward as he, races into the Earth to be destroyed. And then the final scene we have of Earth's destruction is the witnesses on board the arcs in orbit in space, watching the destruction of the planet. There are 80 or so people on this one arc watching, at least 2 children from each group. It's explained that they must be, young enough so that in time they can pass this memory and this experience on to others who are not yet born. So they're here to witness Earth so that mankind never forgets what the planet eaters, what the planet destroyers have done to them. And we see the Earth get destroyed, and I can't do it justice. It's explained really well, with the Earth itself deforming and magma and giant lava flows, and then bits of the crust the size of islands are being flung into near orbit just to drop back down to create larger and larger and larger explosions, until eventually bits of the Earth are escaping the Earth's gravity altogether, going into big trails of orbiting matter around the Earth, as plasma from the inside of the Earth pushes out against the crust and the mantle and just breaks the planet apart completely, which is going to leave it into presumably sort of a disk around the sun where all the materials within are much easier to get to. And that's how our sort of main chapters end. But we do have a final epilogue and a final piece of perspective, the news articles that we've been seeing throughout. And this one is from 400 years in the future, and it's written by Francine, Arthur's wife. And it's talking about the previous few years. Mankind has now settled on Mars. It has been successfully terraformed. 400 years in the future, The Europa ice chunks that dropped on Mars and on Venus have changed the planets. Mars now has lichen and moss everywhere, and the air has enough oxygen to breathe, although you still need a mask in case, you overexert yourself. There's not quite the right level of oxygen in the air yet. But it's a warmer planet now than it was, and there are people living there now. And we see that it's thanks to the great hero of our story, Europa, that mankind has a home still in the solar system. Which answers the question of who did that to Europa, who destroyed the moon. It was very clearly these good side aliens to give mankind a home after their planet was destroyed. And we see from Arthur's point of view, he's down on the surface of Mars where him and his wife live. And he talks about, what life is like down there. It's not an easy life, but there is hope for a sort of utopia. Mankind has kind of a fresh start here. And they're going to try and take that and do what they can with it. And it talks about Reuben, who is leading a exploration mission to Venus, which is not as far along in its terraforming as Mars is. But due to cloud cover across the planet, we can't really tell what's going on there. So he's taken a scientific team over there to, scout it out and see whether it's a place humans could live as well. And we start to find out a bit more about the universe at large. We don't have the lovely utopia that Harry was hoping for. We have very much a sort of dark forest look at the universe where, the only civilizations that manage to survive are the ones that don't get found. Specifically found by these planet destroyers. And this group of aliens or machines that saved humanity are operating ships of the law is kind of the only explanation we get from them. It's specifically stated that whoever originally made these ships and these robotic dwarf things, which have come to be known as mums, they're not saying who created them. And that might be, maybe they don't exist anymore, but it's also just part of, it's the dark forest. You don't tell anyone where you are, who you are, at fear of being destroyed. But their goal and the law is to find whoever built these planet destroyers and destroy them. Everything they do seems to be based towards that goal. They couldn't save Earth, but they can recruit Earthlings in their fight against the planet destroyers and in their search for the builders. All up, it seems we've saved about 12,500 people. A minuscule amount compared to everything that's lost, and something that Arthur struggles to deal with. He says he has to focus on the losses, the specific losses that he can think of. The kids his son played with, the friends he knew, because thinking of it in the totality, his brain and humanity's brain just isn't equipped to deal with a loss at that scale. We just can't even picture it, we can't imagine it, we can't comprehend it. It seems the survivors lived aboard these great arcs, learning how to live in space and learning some discipline, which is very ominous, from the mum robots, before going into a long cold sleep, a cryo sleep, for about 400 years until Mars was ready for them. At which point they're slowly being woken up batch by batch to prepare the colony, make sure there's food. They're beginning to herd animals in the valleys on Mars. Meanwhile, some humans are setting off on newly built ships of the law, created from the crust and the material spat out from Earth. These ships are heading out, hunting for the builders of the planet-destroying probes, hunting for other civilizations that are coming under attack by them to see if they can help them. But the main goal is to find the builders that made this terrible plague on the universe and destroy them. And on one of these ships is Martin, the son of Arthur. Arthur thinks to himself, hey, he's sad that he's never going to see his son again because he's out in the universe now. But it's good that he's grown into a man and this is his goal. He witnessed the destruction of his planet and he's going to go out there and take revenge. In the final few passages of the book, Martin talks about beginning to hone in and narrow down on the builders. The builders clearly realized that what they released was uncontrollable and was destroying every civilization it found. So they've planted fake civilizations around their space with traps and decoys and early warning systems so that if it ever comes near them, hopefully it will go to one of these decoys where there's a trap and it will be destroyed. But the ship of the law has found a few of these, managed to survive the traps, and believes it's narrowing down on where the builders are. And that's where we kind of end the book. So what did I think? I'm gonna do a full review video for this. But I thought the ending was fantastic. I'd love to know what you guys think. I still have so many questions. I want to know there's still so many questions even brought up just by this ending. Everything it answered just opened more questions. For example, the ships of the law that, for example, Martin is on, they say is built from materials of the destroyed planet, which means that the planet-destroying thing isn't using those materials, and we're just on Mars, so that's very close to Earth. So does the planet-destroyer thing not actually even care about, making resources and stealing the resources of the planet? Is its only goal to destroy planets and civilizations? And still, I don't know what was up with the guest and the robots in Australia. I don't know what that whole bit was about. It must have just been a distraction to make sure that we weren't focused on the real goal of the nuclear bombs under the sea and the neutronium in the core of the Earth. And we still don't know who the aliens that saved us were or why they did this, presumably just to recruit us into this war against the builders. But overall, I found the ending very satisfying. We got to the end that I wanted. The book wasn't exactly what I was hoping for. I was hoping for more of a bleakness, more of hopelessness, a bit sadder of a book. But I really enjoyed it. Off the top of my head, I think it's like a 4-star read. I really, really liked it. Yeah, as I said, I'm going to post a full review of it, but I'd love to hear in the comments what you guys thought of the ending. What questions it left you with, what answers it gave you, and what you thought of the book. Like, what did you like, what didn't you like? I really liked most of the book. I didn't like a lot of the Edward stuff after he got released from prison. I've talked about that before. I felt that it was mostly bloat, but the ending at Yosemite is worth it almost. It's a really epic chapter. But yeah, I just want to talk a bit about the experience of this read-along. I've never really read a book like this before, 30 pages every week or two. Whereas normally a book like this, a book this size would take me, 3, maybe 4 days. It's taken me, 10, 12 weeks? And I was really worried that it would really hamper my experience with it. But doing these videos and especially talking with people in the comments that are reading at the same time, that's what I wanted out of YouTube. That's why I started this channel. And so to anyone that's been watching these videos, just thank you so much. They're by far my least viewed videos, but that's fine. They're the reason I started the channel. They're really my passion project, and I'm going to keep doing them. So to that end, I need to know what sort of books we're going to read next. Obviously, we could move on from this to Anvil of the Stars, which is technically the sequel, but it was also a standalone, which I've heard is excellent. I do have a copy of that one. But there's other books we could read. We could read some Peter Hamilton, some Anne Leckie, some William Gibson. We can basically read anything. Nothing's off the table. So if there's anything that you can think of that you'd like me to read, drop it in the comments, and I'll probably do a community poll coming up soon to kind of pick the next book, and then give everyone a few weeks to pick the book up if they want, and then I'll get started on whatever it is we're going to read next. A huge thank you to anyone that came along with me on this journey. I really liked this book. I hope you did too, and I really liked discussing the book with you, and I hope you guys enjoyed that as well. If you want to check out any of the earlier episodes, then the playlist is right up here. If you could leave a like, that'd be fantastic. But most of all, just remember to keep reading.